Just as a Q3 example, 2013, a Bildungsroman or coming-of-age novel recounts the psychological or moral development of its protagonist from youth to maturity, when the character realizes his or her place in the world. Okay, so right there, you'd have to understand coming of age. Most of you probably learned it in 9th grade. So this is what I mean about having a lot of books under your belt, because you have no idea what they're going to throw at you. And it may have been a while since you've studied a book that was actually coming of age. I also like to just stop here. What I would be thinking about is it's the same thing that I've recently been trying to write a screenplay. And so I was listening to a professor talk about it, and he was talking about moving from the character's identity to the character's essence. And that essence is when you really come to the end of your journey and that maturity. So think about it that way. If you start with the prompt and you say, okay, what is the main thing they're testing me to see what I know in the prompt? And that would be the coming of age story itself. Everything that you say, all the examples that you use, is going to be used because you're talking about it in terms of how the protagonist, how this moment is a coming of age moment. Okay, so you can't abandon that. Don't get lost in the prompt, but figure out what is the essence of the prompt. Okay, so coming of age, you got to know that. And then you want some kind of literary technique in place to get you to just kind of also show that you've studied this. Like, let's say that it's Virginia Woolf and she uses stream of consciousness. That would be an example of a technique that you could say to lead you to what theme you're wanting to get at. In this case, I'm going to use Great Expectations. And I'm going to show you throughout the text, but most of you are probably familiar with To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, the reason why I wouldn't use To Kill a Mockingbird is because it's mostly a 9th grade text. Some people read it in 8th grade. And I as a strategy would be thinking, okay, this AP reader is reading about a lot of different books. And it's probably pretty redundant. How am I showing her that I have read something like Mrs. Dalloway or Jude the Obscure and can understand it at a much higher level than everybody else? That's going to be more impressive. But this is a Victorian novel. Pip is kind of the archetype of the orphan, the unwanted child. It says as raising, everybody knows that she raised him up by hand. If you've been raised by hand, you know what that means. But just to kind of show you some humor here, Joe is the sweet husband. He describes as mild, good-natured, sweet-tempered, easygoing, foolish, dear fellow, kind of a Hercules in strength and also in weakness. Well, glancing up at the Dutch clock, she's been on the rampage this last spell, 5 minutes, Pip. She's a-comin'. Get behind the door, old chap. Have the jack-towel betwixt ye. He took the advice. The sister comes in and says, "Where have you been, you young monkey?" said Mrs. Joe, stamping her foot. "Tell me directly what you've been doing to wear me away with fright and frit and worrit. I'll have you out of the corner of your 50 pips and his 500 groggeries." "I've only been to the churchyard," said I, from my stool, crying and rubbing myself. "Churchyard," repeated my sister. "If it weren't for me, you'd been at the churchyard long ago and stayed there. Who brought you up by hand?" "You did." "And why did I do it, I should like to know?" "I don't know. I don't. I tell you, never do it again. I know that I may truly say that I have never had this apron of mine off since you were born. It's bad enough to be a blacksmith's wife, and him a groggery, without being your mother." Okay, so this is setting you up. Joe is like the father figure. And so I'm getting to that moment and just sort of setting this up, but I want you to see what Pip's life is like. And Pip, the Great Expectations is that he gets to leave his social class and be a gentleman. And to him, he thinks that this is all anybody should ever want in the world and what's important. And I liken it to maybe somebody becoming a company man, and they get into the corporation and they become controlled, and are reason why they're company men is they're no longer free thinkers, and they have to do what the company wants him to do. And if you're always doing what other people want you to do, then you're not becoming yourself, and certainly not moving from that identity to essence and character. You're losing yourself. Okay, so this is what Pip gets to experience, and once he gets into that other society that he doesn't fit into anyways, he sort of circles back around to what is important, which is at home. And at the end of this book, there's a story of the prodigal son, and I always read that at the end. So when I'm thinking about this book as a whole, as a bigger picture, what I really want to get to is the idea of the prodigal son. And I want to do it through coming of age, which is great to do. And I should probably say a few things about coming of age. And cute, and everybody loves you and gives you a lot of attention. And your perspective is that people are nice. And this is hopefully that you were raised in a good home. But hopefully you've, that's your perspective. And then you go to school, and all of a sudden people are making fun of the way you look or your clothes, which you know, like you're in kindergarten, like you had a choice. You think, wow, this world is not what I thought it was going to be. And sadly, it can get worse. But what I would use is there's a conversation with Pip and Joe, and Pip has written Joe a letter. Now, Pip doesn't know how to read and write very well, but he actually knows more than Joe. And Joe is just astonished. He says there's a J and there's an O. When I come to a J and an O, Joe, how interesting reading is. Not to mention all the money that could be spared was for want for my mother. She were poor in health and quite broke. She weren't long following, poor soul, until her share of peace came around. Joe's blue eyes turned a little watery. He rubbed first one of them and then the other in the most uncongenial and uncomfortable manner with the round knob of the top of the poker. So he's handling this like poker for the fire, and it's like a cartoon scene, and this is where you find the imagery. And from now on, you don't really say imagery, you say the image. Whatever family opinions or whatever the world opinions on the subject, Pip, your sister is. Joe tapped the top bar with the poker at every word following. A fine figure of a woman. I could think of nothing better to say than, I'm glad you think so, Joe. So am I, returned Joe, catching me up. I'm glad I think so, Pip. A little redness, a little matter of bone here and there, what does it signify to me? And so I got acquainted, and the talk was that she was bringing you up by hand. Very kind of her, too. All the folks said, and I said, along with all the folks. As to you, Joe pursued, with a countenance expressive of seeing something very nasty indeed. If you could have seen how small and flabby and mean you were, dear me, you'd have the most contemptible opinion of yourself. Not exactly relishing this, I said, never mind me, Joe. But I did mind you, Pip, he returned with tender simplicity. When I offered to keep your sister company, and to be asked at the church at such times as she was willing and ready to come to the forge, I said to her, and bring the poor little child. God bless the poor little child. I said to your sister, there's room for him at the forge. I broke out crying and begging pardon, and hugged Joe around the neck, who dropped the poker to hug me, to say, ever best of friends, ain't we, Pip? And this is the part that I would use as the coming of age. Young as I was, I believe that I dated a new admiration of Joe from that night on. We were equals afterwards, as we had been before, but afterwards, at quiet times, When I sat looking at Joe and thinking about him, I had a new sensation of feeling conscious that I was looking up to Joe in my heart. That is where we're moving into a mature view. But unfortunately, when he gets his great expectations, he's embarrassed by Joe, because Joe, going back to the prodigal son, this is what happens to Pip. Basically, he goes into debt and he loses, just like in the story, he loses his inheritance. And he leaves his father. And when he comes back, his father throws like this big feast for him in celebration. And the other brother, rightly so, gets upset and says, "Oh, I've been doing everything I'm supposed to be doing, and you've never done this for me." And so where we're getting to the theme is, he says at the very end, "But when the son of yours came, who devoured your living with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours.' It was fitting to make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So I'm going to show you how I would approach this in a claim. And a claim is going to make all the difference in the world with your essay. And I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so 2 questions you can ask yourself when you work on your claim, which you have to do very quickly. But one question is, am I making an argument? And the second question you want to ask yourself is, am I setting myself up for analysis or summary? And so when I was a teacher, this is what I would often get from students for the first example. It's not bad. It's just you have to think about it in terms of how you're going to show coming of age in the entire novel, representing the entire novel, and making some kind of argument so you're not obvious. Because if you see, the first example says, Pip's great expectations reveal the growth and challenges of coming of age, a growth that teaches him invaluable lessons. That's true. But when I support this, what am I going to do? I'm going to support it with plot summary. I'm going to show how he grows here and he grows there. And at any rate, it's not going to be a high score because you're not going to be persuasive. You have to be persuasive to make, you have to make an argument to be persuasive. So you have to find some way, some angle, and the more background information you have, which is what you get out of my courses that are down in the link below, Great Expectations, Catcher in the Rye, and Their Eyes Are Watching God. 3 very different novels that one of them will work for whatever question. You'll have enough if you do all 3. But see, the second example, Pip's coming of age journey, like the prodigal son's, becomes disillusioned by his great expectations, his ticket to a better class and therefore a better life, making the novel a story of the return to the father. Now that's an argument because a lot of people may not see it as a story, as the return to the father. They may not see that. So you have to prove that. Not only are you going to point to the text, but you're going to analyze the text to show, like that one quote, "As young as I was looking up to Joe in my heart." And Joe actually is the hero of the story. He's the most backwards, he's the least educated, he's poor, but there's a simple dignity to him that is real and that Pip comes to realize is better than anything else that he could possibly do in the material world. Okay, it's not a superficial thing, it's a real connection, and in the end that's what really matters. So like a heroic journey, the end is usually the return. Sometimes the story is only about the return. And an Odyssey that you read, that's coming to, how he has to come back home, and it takes him years and years and years to do that. But that's the end of the story, is that you go and you find something, and then you find out it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be, and you realize something about what you had before.
That's what you want to argue and analyze throughout the text. I hope this was helpful, and if you want to take my courses, they are reasonably priced, and there's about 5 hours of analysis, and I give examples like this and just on how to approach it. I can't tell you what the question's going to be, but I can tell you that the more you know about the book, like, the better off you're going to be in terms of making an argument to support your knowledge of the entire work as a whole. All right, thank you. Good luck.